B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, December 11th, 2018. Good times at the White House today as television crews stayed in the room while Chuck and Nancy, that would be Pelosi and Schumer, argued with Trump and goaded him into threatening a government shutdown that he will own. It was fascinating theater, and it wasn't like Fox and Friends where the hosts all pandered to Trump. No, this was a different kind of television experience. And Trump threw a bit of a hissy fit. He repeatedly interrupted Pelosi. She politely told him he ought to stick to fact-based arguments and stop trying to characterize her position. And all of this is about funding for the wall. The southern border wall that Trump imagines will fix everything. And, of course, it is a huge, huge fantasy. And what is also fascinating is that so far, completing his nearly his second year, occupying the Oval Office, Trump has used increasingly desperate methods to try to wrangle Congress into funding his wall. Now, he said Mexico would pay for it, but we're not supposed to remember that. And the Democrats have played pretty savvy defense. And to date, they have prevented any significant funding for the wall. Now, they gave him a down payment on some repairs to the wall and that sort of thing. But he doesn't have what he's looking for. And so, as they met in the Oval Office today, Trump, Pelosi, Schumer, and Mike Pence, who sat between Trump and Pelosi and looked extremely uncomfortable the entire time. Of course, Trump leaked last week that he and his advisors, whoever they are, have considered dropping Mike Pence from the re-election ticket in 2020. So he may not be a happy camper for a lot of different reasons, but in this exchange, he had his mute button firmly in place. So let's listen to the audio as Pelosi, Schumer, and Trump mix it up in the Oval Office.
One thing I think we can agree on is we shouldn't shut down the government over a dispute. And you want to shut it down. You keep talking about it.
The last time, Chuck, you shut it down.
No.
And then you opened it up very quickly. And
20 times.
I don't want to do what you did.
20 times
Chuck,
you have called for, I will shut down the government if I don't get my wool. None of us have said.
You want to know something?
You've said it.
Okay, you want to put that on my...
You've said it.
I'll take it.
Okay, good.
You know what I'll say? Yes. If we don't get what we want, one way or the other, whether it's through you, through a military, through anything you want to call, I will shut down the government.
Okay,
absolutely.
fair enough.
And I am proud, and I'll tell you what, I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck, because the people of this country don't want criminals and people that have lots of problems and drugs pouring into our country. So I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it. The last time you shut it down, it didn't work. I will take the mantle of shutting down. And I'm going to shut it down for border
But we
security.
believe you shouldn't shut it down.
Thank you.
So it was a bizarre exchange. Before what I just played, Nancy Pelosi tried to get the president to dismiss the media so that their disagreements would not have to be aired out in this kind of school kid fashion. Now, some of the quotes, Pelosi said the American people recognize that we must keep government open, that a shutdown is not worth anything, and we should not have a Trump shutdown. And Trump was a little bit offended to have his name attached to it that way. Leaving the West Wing, Schumer told reporters that Trump had thrown a temper tantrum over the wall. The president made clear he wants a shutdown. So Trump began the day by tweeting false statements like the Great Wall on the southern border has already been partially built, substantial sections, he claims. That's not really true. It's not true at all. It is a bizarre projection on his part. He also suggested that the military could build the wall, but I don't believe that is legal, And I think they would have started some kind of brick-and-mortar construction down there after they were deployed to confront the caravan at the wrong location just before the midterm elections. Yes, the military that was dispatched to the border ended up some 1,500 miles from the point where the dreaded caravan from Central America arrived. That's near the San Diego border. So in one of the tweets, Trump said people do not yet realize how much of the wall, including really effective renovation, has already been built. If the Democrats do not give us the votes to secure our country, the military will build the remaining sections of the wall. They know how important it is. But we know that Defense Secretary Mattis has danced around the orders to deploy troops to the border and instructed them to do nothing. Oh, they strung some concertina wire, they tuned up their trucks, they practiced their outdoor camping. But it was a meaningless exercise just for the photo opportunity. And so what was exposed today is that Trump thought he had laid a trap for Pelosi and Schumer. But it appears that he's the one who got cornered, who got trapped. And now, because his ego is so big and his bully persona is so important to him, well, there is a chance of a government shutdown just in time for the holidays. That'll be the new war on Christmas, I guess. And separately, we're learning that the Trump administration, over the summer when children were separated from their parents because of the misguided and ill-begotten zero-tolerance plan that was put into effect with absolutely no planning, well, we're learning that 170 undocumented immigrants who came forward to try to take migrant children out of government custody have been arrested. And 109 of those 170 have no criminal record whatsoever. And that's the pretext that ICE has used to claim that, we cannot give these children to criminals. But most of them who are designated as criminals, the only crime is illegally crossing our border. And so this kind of catch-22 that prolongs child separation, that compounds the blunders that were already made, is now exposed. And California Senator Kamala Harris said it's outrageous. I don't know if this is intended or unintended, but a natural consequence of this is that these children will have nowhere to go. Trump is hoping for one moment of bipartisanship as Mitch McConnell has buckled under to pressure from the White House and elsewhere to allow a vote on a very modest reform in criminal sentencing that has been promoted by Van Jones and his partner who's based here in Marin County, California, Jessica Sloan. Their original intention was cut 50, reduce the federal prison population by half. And the First Step Act, which is a modest effort in that direction, has garnered a lot of negative energy and pushback from the far right in the Republican Party, evidenced by Tom Cotton of Arkansas, who says this is a jailbreak bill. But what it does is invest in anti-recidivism programs in federal prison, expansion of early release credits with changes to sentencing laws, and what is being modified right now was the most important reform, which is to allow judges to use their own judgment when they are sentencing people in their courts, and not to be bound by these onerous minimum mandatory sentences that are not fit to the specific crime, but broadly applied to categories of crime. And it appears that that is what's going to be watered down before this bill hits the floor. Mitch McConnell is blaming Trump for this. But what's interesting is the number 2 Republican, the whip, Senator John Cornyn, was rounding up votes for this. And many people believe that he was actually trying to impede and obstruct letting this bill go to the floor for a vote. But when McConnell announced that there will be a vote, Cornyn quickly seized on that news to announce that he will personally vote for the bill. and whips indicate as many as 75 senators will vote for this package. Again, I support it as a first step. It's a very modest one, and if they gut the provisions that would allow so-called downward departures from minimum mandatory sentences, it will be almost meaningless. Some legal scholars have told the Guardian newspaper that the efforts by Republicans in Wisconsin, Michigan, and North Carolina to use their power before Democrats take over in January to restrict the power of those incoming elected Democrats, well, the legal beagles suggest that the courts will not allow this legislation to stand. Now, of course, it's going to have to go through the state courts where, for example, I believe in Wisconsin, the majority on the state Supreme Court is 4-3 for Republicans. And so it'll take federal court action to basically read the Constitution, federal, and the state constitutions of Michigan and Wisconsin, look at the separation of powers, and the legal scholars say that there are very strong arguments that these changes are unconstitutional because the Constitution of the states prohibits changes to citizen-initiated laws in the same legislative session. That relates to what Michigan is doing to try to gut a minimum wage law that the Republican-controlled legislature passed earlier this year. And they also, in Michigan, previously overrode citizen initiatives in imposing the right-to-work law and in rolling back other measures that voters had passed. Now, over in Wisconsin, the separation of powers argument seems to be very strong and essentially says that, well, the legislature cannot write rules that limit the constitutional authority of a governor or an attorney general. You know, I ad-lib this podcast every day. I don't have a written script, and so there are often times when I wonder, what did I actually say yesterday? And sometimes I play the podcast back just to see what he said. And last night, as I was watching some of the news coverage of the Supreme Court's remarkable decision not to take up the lower court appeals of states that banned funding for Planned Parenthood, I thought maybe I had overstated it. Because I was saying how remarkable it was that Brett Kavanaugh didn't join Gorsuch, Thomas, and Alito and provide the swing vote that would have required the court to take up the appeals. And I thought, well, gosh, doesn't it take 5? I mean, because I had characterized Kavanaugh as, kind of channeling the former swing vote on the court, the man he has replaced, Anthony Kennedy. But in the fine print of the coverage by the Los Angeles Times today, it says it takes 4 justices to hear a case, and these appeals were considered in a series of closed-door meetings, but unable to get Kavanaugh to pick up. Well, he was the swing vote, and in fact, he did make a difference and play the role of Anthony Kennedy yesterday. So I had prepared to apologize for this, and let's cue the Apologia chorus, just for fun. Excuse me. Today it was Google's turn to face idiotic questions about technology from members of the lame duck Republican-controlled House Judiciary Committee. Now, I want to be clear. I think that there are a lot of issues that Google needs to answer for, including the way they track our location, and they grab all kinds of data in order to service ads that they make billions of dollars on. And the New York Times, a couple of days ago, ran a piece where they followed people by following the location sensor on their cell phone. And it shows that people's daily habits are exposed to the scrutiny of other people. And in one case, a woman went to an abortion clinic. And that was duly recorded by Google. And we don't know if they served up ads related to abortion or family planning or anything in that vein. but there is a lot of concern and heightened awareness about the amount of data they collect and how intrusive it can be, particularly when they track your location. Now, in every app that I use, I opt out of giving my location. But when I want to use Waze or the Apple mapping system, or I ask Siri to get me directions someplace, I know that they are capturing my current location. And while I don't have anything to hide, I don't like it. I find it invasive and, inappropriate. So a bunch of Republicans peppered the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, with questions that he generally batted away. The biggest issues coming from Republicans is they think that Google's search has anti-conservative bias. And their evidence is kind of flimsy. They have some quotes from Googlers who were concerned when Trump got elected, and they expand that to some sort of a broad indictment. Now, I'm not a conservative, and I haven't used Google to search from a conservative worldview. But every indication I have is that they pander to the collected data and the profile that they have on each individual like me when I enter a query and they respond to it. So I think that there are serious questions about the monopoly power that Google has. But all they wanted to ask about was conservative bias and a few questions about whether Google will ever launch a censored search engine in China. And Sundar Pichai dodged those questions in general. Now, there also were protests from Google employees who are demanding that mandatory arbitration be eliminated for all employees. And I support that notion. Also, in a separate matter, more than 50 human rights organizations signed a letter to Pichai demanding that the company stop working on Project Dragonfly, the initiative within Google to build a censored search engine that would be deployed in the Chinese market. Also, Google announced on Monday it had found a security vulnerability last month at Google+. The problem exposed the personal information of only 52 million users to third-party developers, even if you had set your information to private. Google's response, no evidence any developers had misused the data, and they're moving up the shutdown of Google+ to April, this coming April 2019. Today I'm releasing a fresh, in-depth interview with a fascinating man who I met last summer while I was on vacation in Maine. Robert Shetterly is a talented, self-taught painter. And he explains that as Bush got ready to launch the war in Iraq based on lies, he needed to do something. And so he started painting portraits of Americans who tell the truth. Now he has a gallery of upwards of 200 portraits, including 150 living truth-tellers. I hope you'll take a browse at his website and look at some of these portraits. And here's an excerpt from my interview with Rob Shetterly, where he had an interesting reaction to my demonization of Trump for being a liar and pointed out, well, he's not the only one.
You know, so I on the one hand, I agree, I understand completely what you're saying. On the other hand, this sort of mask of civility, the suit, that covers George Bush or even Obama at times, who was, seemed to be a man of great integrity, was also lying to us about a number of things about the country and our history and about militarism and things. It's kind of baffling. Mm-hmm. And this is where the role of the media also becomes so important. I mean, they do feast on Trump to some degree, but they were so complicit in the lies of Bush and Obama that they don't go there.
I invite you to listen to the full interview with Rob Shetterly. It's available for my subscribers today at peterbcollins.com, at iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher. And it's all made possible by listeners like you who support my work, including Suzanne Bowen, Aidan McAleer, Benny Alto up in Oregon. He's got a subscription for each one of his pets. And the amazing Faith Peoples continues to contribute I've lost track of how many subscriptions she has, but I appreciate each and every one of you. And here, as we are in the season of giving, I want to invite people who've been holding back for whatever reason to step on up and take out a subscription here at peterbcollins.com. And I want to thank, let me get the name correct here, because just today I received an unsolicited $50 contribution from Vikas Oswald. And Vikas makes a request for a fresh interview with Anand Gopal. I'm going to work on that. I'm open to your suggestions. I can't always guarantee that the person you want me to interview will submit to a Peter B. Collins interview, but I'm happy to give it a try. So be as generous as you can, and I'd love to see a wave of new sign-ups here at the holiday season. It would certainly make my holiday merry. So visit peterbcollins.com, find the menu button, click on that, then click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page. The options are laid out for you there, and I hope you'll take out a subscription and support the Peter B. Collins podcast. Now, here's a story that I want to credit to Robin Gilbert, a longtime listener and subscriber to this podcast, and she picked up on coverage that I did late in November related to one of the wildfires here in California. This one was the Woolsey fire that hammered Thousand Oaks on one side and Malibu on the other. And we are now learning that the place where the fire started was an abandoned federal weapons and rocket engine test site. Remember when Trump came to California? And he said, well, you know, you people don't cut enough trees. You don't rake your forests. Well, his ignorance was outsized that day as it is every day. And what he failed to know or note is that the Woolsey fire is believed to have been started at this federal facility that is loaded with toxins called the Santa Susana Field Laboratory. And I want to thank Robin Gilbert because she tipped me to Dar Jamal's excellent report at truthout.org. And I've known Dar for a long time. In fact, he's coming to the Bay Area to talk about his new book on climate change, and I'll be interviewing him in public in early February. We'll get you the details on that as we get closer. At any rate, Robin wrote, on a personal note, I was 8 when my family moved from Kansas to Canoga Park, 1956, and we heard and felt the rocket engine testing at what was then called Rocketdyne. We moved in 1962, but in July of 59 there was a nuclear reactor meltdown, and the reactor was vented to the atmosphere to relieve the pressure, exposing a large number of people to dangerous radionuclides. That was kept secret, one of the many sins committed at SSFL. And, Robin, I appreciate this. I'm linking to Dar Jamal's story. It's got a lot of fresh details. He interviewed Bob Dodge, the president of Physicians for Social Responsibility, and the fire, we believe, was started on the Santa Susana Field Laboratory. Jamal publishes a release from Physicians for Social Responsibility that identifies the origin of the fire at E Street and Alpha Road on the base, the facility there at SSFL. So he quotes Denise Duffield of the Physicians for Social Responsibility. It is ironic that an electrical substation built for a reactor that melted down 6 decades ago now may be associated with a catastrophic fire that began on the SSFL site that is still badly contaminated. And Jamal goes on to take to task California's Department of Toxic Substances Control, which, kind of like Christine Todd Whitman after 9/11, saying, no problem, no worries, come on down and dig up the World Trade Center. Well, the California Department of Toxic Substances says that they do not believe the fire has caused any releases of hazardous materials that would pose a risk to people exposed to the smoke. But Dar Jamal talks to an expert, Professor Daniel Hirsch, now retired from UC Santa Cruz, but he was at UCLA years ago. And he takes strong issue with the claims that the situation is safe. because that same department, the California Department of Toxic Substances Control, entered into an agreement to begin a full cleanup of the Santa Susana facility to be finished in 2017. But Hirsch says we're in 2018. The cleanup not only hasn't been completed, it hasn't even begun. This is similar to San Francisco's Hunters Point, a decommissioned naval station, loaded with toxic residue, and some of it's radioactive. And the San Francisco Chronicle has exposed that San Francisco police set up a substation just outside an area that was being tested and cleaned up for nuclear exposure, and now a group of those cops have cancers, leukemia, and they're blaming it on the failure to clean up that toxic site. So back to Santa Susana. Well, the facility is located on a hill. The contamination can roll downhill. And according to Duffield, an estimated 500,000 gallons of the very hazardous trichloroethylene, TCE, were used to flush out rocket test engines and then allowed to seep into the soil and groundwater. Exposure to these contaminants can cause cancers, leukemia, and much more. So this is a story we will continue to follow, and I want to thank Robin Gilbert for tipping me off to Dar Jamal's excellent article. I also consider Dar to be an expert on the war in Iraq. He was an unembedded reporter there for several years, wrote a book about it, and today the Iraqi authorities are reopening the Green Zone, the heavily fortified neighborhood in the heart of Baghdad that the U.S. walled off to establish its military command posts on the site of Saddam Hussein's former palaces. And the Iraqi government says that while they've tried to reopen it in the past and then had to re-secure it, this time it's for good. And it is a celebration of the first anniversary of Iraq's recapture of Mosul from the Islamic State. In Paris, Emmanuel Macron broke his silence, went on television last night, and he offered a bunch of treats to try to get the protesters and some rioters to get off the streets of Paris. Macron, who is often perceived as arrogant and distant, adopted a soft voice, a gentle, apologetic tone. He declared an economic and social state of emergency, ordering the government and parliament to take immediate steps. He wants an increase in the minimum wage, starting with the first of the year, abolition of taxes on overtime pay in 2019, asking profitable companies to give workers tax-free year-end bonuses, slashing a tax increase on small pensions, acknowledging that it was unjust. But his critics say he refuses to reinstate a tax on the wealthy in France, and that is something they're insisting on. In Charlottesville, quick action from the jury that didn't deliberate long before it convicted James Fields on Friday of first-degree murder for ramming his car into the crowd that killed Heather Heyer at the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. Today, he was sentenced to life in prison for first-degree murder and an additional 419 years and a $480,000 fine. He still faces a federal hate crime trial that could lead to the death penalty. I often criticize the New York Times, and I think the Gray Lady deserves it for its coverage of the Trump-Russia narrative, and I've been very clear about that. At the same time, when the Times does good work, I'm happy to acknowledge it. And Sunday's paper brought me two examples. On the front page, a great enterprise investigative story about the medical research industries, the role that doctors play in discovering new drugs and medications, and the way they handsomely profit from that work. And the issue is that those doctors fail to disclose the compensation they get, particularly from pharmaceutical companies, when they write up articles and peer review submissions for the various medical journals. And the Times goes deep, declaring the broken system lets the doctors omit their industry ties. And I think this is a very serious issue, particularly when you're talking about public universities, where these doctors use that infrastructure to develop, say, a, groundbreaking cancer medication. But then they personally hold the patents, and they personally set up corporations that profit from the discoveries that were made on the public dime. So the Times singles out Dr. Howard A. Skip Burris III, President-elect of the American Society of Clinical Oncology. In recent years, several major drug companies that develop treatments for cancer, including AstraZeneca, Genentech, and Novartis, have paid Dr. Burris's employer, the Sarah Cannon Research Institute in Nashville, for his speaking and consulting work. He was paid for speeches. He was paid, $8 million came from those drug companies to support his clinical trials. Now, I'm not suggesting that any money went into his own pocket that was undeserved. But he didn't report this in more than 50 journal articles. He said he had no financial disclosures to make. And this is replicated time after time in this industry. And the other noteworthy piece from Sunday's New York Times under the byline of columnist Maureen Dowd. Now, Maureen Dowd runs hot and cold, and there are times when I find her really annoying. And there are times when I feel like she just nails it. So I'm going to take a moment here to read the opening paragraphs of her description of George H.W. Bush's funeral. And in it, she describes the American royalty and some of the juicy conflicts between them. In the back of the National Cathedral where I sat, you could feel waves of love and respect for the 41st president. But up front, there was a force field of darker emotions bristling. The tableau vivant of presidents, vice presidents, and almost presidents was rife with resentment, jealousy, and loathing. Jimmy Carter in the front row, next to Hillary Clinton, whom he voted against in the 2016 Democratic primary, and near Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, both of whom Carter felt did not treat him with the respect he deserved. Bill, with his yearning for father figures, had won over H.W., but H.W. could not abide Donald Trump and had voted for Hillary in the 2016 election. Al Gore, spitting distance from Jim Baker, the architect of Gore's 2000 recount loss, and behind Bill, whom he curtailed on the campaign trail in 2000 because of his affair with Monica Lewinsky, and near Clarence Thomas, who was part of the court that denied Gore the presidency. Joe Biden behind Hillary, whom he thinks superseded him to get Obama's nod only to blow her campaign. You could almost see the tide of disdain wash over President Trump, who wants to be in the club, yet hates it because he knows the elites hate him. He was in the row with Hillary, whom he still talks about prosecuting, and Bill, whose accusers he brought to his debate with Hillary. Donald and Melania were next to the Obamas, who think Trump is a lowlife for his birther crusade. And you know Jeb despises the man who became 45 by viciously belittling him and his brother. Sitting uncomfortably close to each other were W and his vice, Dick Cheney, who fell into bad odor first with H.W. and years later with W, after Cheney hijacked W's presidency and spun lies to get America into Iraq. I mean, this is great writing, and it serves up honest descriptions of the Game of Thrones cast that populates America's political elite. Thanks for listening to my ranting and raving, my daily news and comment podcast. Feel free to share it. You'll find it on YouTube. And I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.